September 24, 2019 regular meeting of the Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Additionally, the agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city's website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. The roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission are outlined on the reverse side of tonight's agenda.
Excuse me, we don't have enough agendas.
Excuse me.
We will prepare more agendas.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting us know.
State law and the agenda will be projected up above. State law establishes planning commissions. The commission is comprised of 9 members, all of whom have volunteered to serve. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. The other individuals seated at the dais this evening are representatives of the city's planning department, the city attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates. If you wish to address the planning commission, please come forward when recognized. Provide your name and address on the sign-on sheet. And please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. At this time, I ask that all cell phones, Blackberries, PDAs, or any other devices that might disrupt this meeting, please either be placed in silent mode or be turned off. Ms. Zarnicki, the roll call, please.
Mr. Abhidian?
Here.
Ms. Cruz? Mr. Faison?
Here.
Ms. Fowler?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Krent?
Here.
Mr. Lambert?
Here.
Mr. Rahman?
Here.
Tagle?
Here.
Mr. Tattapalli?
Here.
Quorum is present. Item number 2 on tonight's agenda is approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting. I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Ms. Fowler, and support? Mr. Lambert, thank you. Ms. Zarnicki?
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Motion carries. Item number 3 is approval of the minutes of the September 10th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. If there are no questions or comments on the minutes, can I get a motion to approve? Okay. Mr. Abhidian. And support?
I'll take it.
Mr. Krent, thank you. Ms. Zarnicki?
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Abstain. Motion carries. Item number 4 is public comment for items that are not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to speak on an item that is not on tonight's agenda?
You got a hand up there.
Yes, Miss? I know most of you are here for the item that's on the agenda. Good
My
evening.
name's Deborah Lazecki. I'm a 37-38-year resident, and I work
Just
live.
so your comment is on an item that's not on the agenda?
Yes, sir.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm here to ask all of you, including Brent, to maybe look into the neighborhood node. I'm concerned with the density. I've seen it come up from comments here and also in Troy City Council. And I really would like to have the master plan addressed on that. And that's it.
Thank you for your
Thank
comment.
you.
And did you sign in?
Yes, sir.
Item number 5 on tonight's agenda, preliminary site plan review, file number SP20190022, proposed Crooks Road Townhomes, west side of Crooks Road, north of Waddles Road, section 17, currently zoned NN, neighborhood node I district. Mr. Carlisle.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, excuse me. Mr. Abhidian, did you want to make a point? Yeah.
Mr. Chair and fellow commissioners, I'd like to make full disclosure. The item that's before us tonight on the agenda is a project where most of you know that actually I'm running for city council in November. And the property owner that owns this property where this project is being proposed actually gave me permission more than a month ago to actually put some signs on his property. And campaign signs go along with local campaigns, as we all know. And in terms of contributions, I have not accepted any contributions from the property owner, but I have from the developer, just as I have from other citizens and residents of Troy equally. So I wanted to make that disclosure tonight, and I wanted to let you make the determination if I need to recuse myself from this meeting or if I can continue. Most of you know that I during the past 5 years on this planning commission, I have reviewed and I have voted on projects based on their merit, based on the facts and that alone. So I just want to let you make that decision for tonight's project that's before us.
So, Mr. Friend, I had a question with regard to that. So I think we should vote on that. But I just had a question as to how you define if someone is potentially conflicted in a situation like that.
Well, there is not a specific definition for conflict of interest in the city's ethics ordinance. I know that's something that City Council is going to be grappling with shortly. Mostly, the city is concerned with any pecuniary interest. Mr. Epihadian acknowledged that he's received contributions from the developer, and I'm assuming he means Mr. Staffa. I think it might be valid to inquire how much that contribution is. There's a difference between $25 or $2,500. You know, the city would be hard pressed to conduct any business if we told all of our elected officials and all the people sitting on committees that they can't campaign or they can't accept contributions. So the fact that there's been a contribution does not disqualify Mr. Epihadian in and of itself. But if there's, obviously he needs to comply with campaign finance and all of those filing requirements of the county. But I think it's appropriate for this body to vote. I think it's appropriate to maybe make some additional inquiries of Mr. Epihadian regarding the amount, and if any discussions were had about a quid pro quo, because those are the types of things that the city is concerned about. Was a donation given, you know, so that he would vote a certain way? I'm not suggesting that by any means, but those are the, you know, what we're concerned about.
Thank you. Are you willing to share that information?
Sure. What are the questions, specific questions?
Yeah,
Well, I
I
think
think
the
it'd be more appropriate to ask Mr. Epihadian questions. I mean, he's just disclosed what he wanted to disclose. It might be more instructive to ask him questions if there are specific questions that members have.
Well, I would only ask the two questions posed. The amount of the contribution?
So the amount that my campaign received, first of all, I just want to make sure that that's going to be fully disclosed in public documents. It becomes available. Every candidate has to disclose that amount. So in full transparency, I can disclose that here. It'll be public with the county record. So there's absolutely nothing to hide. So the amount that I received from Mr. Staffa was $500 for my campaign.
Thank you. And was there any kind of quid pro quo?
No, absolutely not.
That's what I said.
There was not even implied, not even explicit. I would not risk my family, my career, my future, my children for anything like that, and that would never happen. My integrity is worth more than any dollar amount, and you guys know me better than that. So
I have no further questions. I don't know if anyone else has any questions. No? So then should we then vote?
I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, so Ms. Sargent?
I think we should clearly frame what the planning commission is voting on. For example, is it in the affirmative, is it in the negative, et cetera? Clearly frame it.
Well, from my perspective, I think we're voting on if we as a planning commission think that Mr. Epihadian should recuse himself because of the contribution that he disclosed.
So we're voting to see if he should recuse himself.
Right.
Okay. You're ready then?
I am ready.
Okay. Ms. Fowler?
No.
Mr. Hudson?
I've known Mr. Epihadian for 5 years in this planning commission, and I have no doubts about his integrity whatsoever.
Mr. Krent?
No.
Mr. Lambert?
No.
Mr. Rahman?
No.
Mr. Tagle?
No.
Mr. Appidian is abstained, I assume. And Mr. Faison?
No. And Mr. Abhay, thanks for being so transparent, volunteering the information, and sharing the follow-up questions as well. So are we ready for the presentation?
Good evening to the Planning Commission and to the public. I will try to speak as loudly and clearly as I can. I have a very lengthy report in review of this application, which was included in the packet online. So I'm not going to go into specific all the details, but I'm more going to hit the high spots and then leave time for any questions that may be arised. Tonight before us is a proposed development. The subject site is located on the east side of Crooks Road between Rawls Road and Long Lake. It's a 2.73 site. It's currently improved as a single-family home, and that single-family home would be removed if the proposed development was approved.
Just
the
west
applicant.
side of Crooks Road, right?
I'm sorry.
It's on the west side of the Crooks Road.
It's on the west side of Crooks, correct? Yes.
It's kind of a little bit error in the
Okay.
report.
Thank you. So the applicant proposes to develop the site as a 60-unit townhome project. The 6 units are grouped into 8 total buildings. The number of units within each building vary from 4 to 12. The 4-unit building is located at number 1. The 12-unit building is located at building number 8 in the back. All buildings are 3 stories in height, and they are accompanied by a 2-car tandem garage. So what a tandem garage essentially means is cars parked back to back within the garage, not parallel or next to each other. Access to the site will be off of Crooks Road into an internal drive. The applicant does propose an emergency vehicle access connection at the site's northwest boundary at Carson Drive. That access point would only be used for emergency vehicles only, and it will have some sort of permanent barricade that would be located in between Carson Drive and the development. The building arrangement, we met with the applicant on August 13th of 2019 to discuss the proposed application. At that time, we had a very lengthy discussion and had raised opportunities or issues that the applicant should address in their resubmittal. These focus on reducing impacts upon the adjacent properties and providing a better and safer layout for future residents. We do note that most of our recommendations were not taken by the applicant, and the application seen before you tonight is very similar to what we saw in early August. So these opportunities include a number of them and mostly related to site arrangement. The first is stormwater location. The proposed stormwater location is actually located on the south side of the property below number 6 in unit 4. This is adjacent to another single-family property that is also zoned neighborhood node. One of the items that we discussed was actually shifting the stormwater location from the south side to the north side to give a significant amount of additional buffer between the adjacent single-family homes and the development, including 7, 5, and 3. Doing that would also not only allow for additional buffer, it would shift those buildings south and reduce the impact upon the adjacent northern property lines. In addition, the applicant is requesting the use of a vinyl fence along the northern property line. That would require a special approval from the Planning Commission, as the ordinance does require landscaping buffer and not the use of a vinyl fence. We believe that the applicant is requesting the use of a vinyl fence simply because they don't have the room to put the required landscape buffer in. So by switching the stormwater location on the south side to the north side, it provides them the opportunity to put additional landscaping and buffering in that location. One of the other recommendations that we talked about was we had concern about the length and straightness of the internal drive and in relation to the height of the proposed building at 40 feet. We feel this kind of creates, for lack of a better term, a kind of a canyon effect as you look down that drive aisle. In addition, it does provide an opportunity for increased speeding and traffic within that center drive. So one of the things we had talked about doing was producing a slight jog in the road. A slight jog in the road would one, naturally just deter car speeds, but in addition would break up the visual massing, especially along Crooks Road. One of the concerns we also had, and this was relayed by the engineering department, was the tandem parking in the garage. Just knowing the human nature, it's likely that cars or people that live in these townhomes may not want to park back to back to each other and have to move their cars in and around, and it's very tight space, especially where they have their driveways. So we have concern that people will tend to park in some of the guest spaces, so those guest spaces wouldn't be opened up for guest parking. So we are asking for additional guest parking as well. In addition, we had talked about changes to the elevations along the northern property line. We do note that these are 40-foot tall structures adjacent to single-family residential. The impact of second-story and third-story windows and visualization into the adjacent northern properties, if with additional buffering and changes to those elevations, that can reduce that impact on those properties. The other issue we also talked about was breaking up building number 8 with a 12-unit building. It's a very long, it's about 163 feet in length building without any sort of breakup and massing. It is also the terminus of the view from Carson Drive looking south into the property. So there's opportunities to kind of reduce the visual impact on Carson Drive by reducing the massing of that building number 8. And lastly, we had raised the issue of providing a pedestrian connection between Carson and the development. That wasn't shown in the application. Engineering has done a very detailed review of the plans. They have offered 5 considerations. These are a little more technical, but they do relate to the site plan itself. First, they do speak about reconfiguring the rear part to eliminate, they have some triangle-shaped kind of curb areas, and they talk about removing those. They have concerns about how trash collection would work, and specifically how a trash truck and or a delivery truck would maneuver the site and turn around within the site. They have questions about the design of the garage and whether or not there's really true access to get 2 cars with the narrowness of the door. They would like the applicant to show site triangles. And lastly, they find that accessible parking should be dispersed throughout the site. When the Planning Commission reviews this application, there are really 2 sets of standards the Planning Commission should review. The first is in section 5.06, that's the form-based district requirements, and there's really 4 sections of that speak to standards. The first is building orientation and entrance, ground story activation, transitional features, and site access and parking loading. Similar, with some of the same common issues, is section 8.06, which talks about site plan review standards. And there's 3 that the Planning Commission should consider. The development should ensure compatibility to existing commercial districts and provide a transition between land uses. Development shall incorporate the recognized best architectural design practices. And lastly, enhance the character, environment, and safety for pedestrians and motorists. In our review, we listed a number of site plan comments, and I went through those very briefly, but based on our comments, we find that the standards set forth in both section 5 and 8 are not met. Specifically, we note the issues of compatibility and transitions. We find that if with certain site plan changes, they may be able to meet these standards, but based on what they've submitted tonight, we find that they have not met those standards. So based on that, we are recommending that the Planning Commission postpone action to allow the applicant to address the items noted in our report, and specifically those items noted with regards to compatibility and transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any Planning Commissioner questions for Mr. Carlisle? Mr. Hudson.
Mr. Carlisle, can you show us on one of the boards where the lane, call it creek, ditch, or whatever the water course is?
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. It's located in the back behind number 8, runs along this course. There's actually a retaining wall that backs up to unit 8. Building 8, I should say.
Is that water course can be covered or will remain open?
It's remain open. There's no building there. It's actually out. There's a floodway. I'm sorry, it's a floodplain in that corner, and the applicant's actually out of the floodplain as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Savina.
Sometimes when planners talk about projects, they speak planner jargon and they don't speak plain English. When we talk about this EVA located here, proposed to be located here, it's emergency vehicle access. We assume that everyone knows what we're talking about. In hindsight, I should have put a design for an EVA. We have a typical design. They are permanently barricaded. They use wooden bollards with holes drilled near the bottom, and how they're utilized in the event of an emergency. Emergency vehicles can physically drive through them and break the wooden bollards. They damage the vehicles. They damage the bumpers, and they're in all likelihood never going to be used, but never say never. It is possible that in rare events they would be used. If they were broken, they would immediately be replaced with a new wooden bollard. So they are in effect permanent.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other questions? Mr. Abedian?
Mr. Carlisle, can you clarify, even though we have that floodplain there, this site actually has no wetland, is that correct? So nowhere in that wooded area,
That's correct.
nowhere on that west side, there's any
They
wetland?
submitted a wetland delineation report, and it's floodplain, not wetland.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Tagle?
Mr. Carlisle, in your conversations with the developer, when you were talking about some suggested alterations, can you tell me if the number of units would have to be decreased to accomplish those modifications?
Mr. Tagle, it's difficult to say, and I don't want to presume that. Most likely there would be have to reduction in units, but I don't want to be confirmative on that until we actually see the changes to the design.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Abedian?
You know, we have a standard for setbacks, front setbacks, rear yard setbacks. I don't recall, do we have a standard for requirements between actual buildings? Do we, in terms of minimum distance between units and buildings, or is that kind of left up to the layout and the architect to establish?
There is in the building code, there's separation requirements in building code due to openings. So this would have to meet the building code requirements for separation between buildings itself.
This is for Mr. Carlisle. I just want to double check. I have the same question what Mr. Tagle had. So we did not, city did not provide any recommendation for number of units.
We don't.
Is it clear? Or you assume that it will be reduced. I understand that, but you did not explicitly mention that the number of units has to be reduced, right?
So the neighborhood node does not have a density cap. The density is controlled by factors of height, parking, setback, but it's also issues of transitions, compatibility. So those are additional avenues, open space requirements that regulate density. But there is no hard cap in the ordinance that says this many units per acre. It's based on those other factors.
Because I was looking back, one of the proposal we had, and I find that the density is even higher. You probably remember another proposal that came to us which actually did not go through Planning Commission. So I just want to, maybe we can follow up on this and figure out some guidelines so that, you know, we can give some idea to the applicants, just an idea, we can talk.
And Mr. Lambert, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carlisle, for the buildings that are on the north end, 7, 5, 3, and 1, what is the proposed height that the developer has requested for that?
The elevations indicate a total height of 40 feet. It is a pitched roof, so that's not the height by how the zoning ordinance works, but at peak roof, it's 40 feet.
And secondly, and maybe both for my education and for the members of the public, the whole neighborhood node zoning, is there a by right aspect of neighborhood node, or does the city have, Planning Commission and ultimately maybe City Council, have the ability to say, this is not right for this area?
So
we have a large audience here, and we're going to give everyone a chance to speak, but just in order to conduct the meeting in the most appropriate way, we'd ask you to refrain from clapping and cheering. And again, everyone in the audience who wants to speak to make a point will be given that opportunity to do so. So thank you.
Try it again.
Can I speak now? Mr. Lambert, as you know, there are multiple forms of types of approvals. There's rezonings, there's conditionally, there's special uses, and there's by right development that meets zoning. This is zoning-wise, this is a permitted use on this site. So it is essentially, you will hear the term by right, but it essentially is a permitted use on the site. That being said, there are still standards under which they have to be approved. And those standards I went through and talk about compatibility and transition. So while it may be a by right use, and we don't necessarily have a concern about the use itself, We have concern about other elements as relation to the development. But there are those standards under which the Planning Commission has the authority to amend the development or not approve the development or approve the development as submitted. So you have discretion to make improvements to the site plan under those standards.
Mr. Tatterpelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carla, how wide is the street? Because it feels like it's very narrow and people cannot park in that area.
How long? It's hard to see in this, but there's actually basically a curb that separates the proposed driveways to the units. It's 28 feet from what we call back of curb to back of curb.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
That was the standard.
Mr. Abdahidi.
Let me.
Just to clarify, 28 feet is the standard width of a road in the
Understood.
city of Troy.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Carlisle, just to piggyback a little bit on what was mentioned earlier by right, can you just compare and contrast the one aspect that is really one of the critical aspects here for this project, and we've had other projects in the city that was brought up. What is by right neighborhood node in terms of stories and height, and what is being proposed here, just for information purposes?
Under the zoning ordinance, technically, the maximum height is 4 stories, 55 feet. The applicant is requesting 3 stories and 40 feet. If the Planning Commission, though, does remember, we had discussed a month ago or so amendments to those provisions to reduce the height, specifically when adjacent to single-family residential. We haven't enacted those, so they're not in place for that. But those are the amendments that we are talking about to address the height of 4 stories.
And as you mentioned earlier, there's that aspect, but there's also the compatibility and the transition aspects we need to weigh as well.
Correct, because in some instances 40 feet may be appropriate. In other cases it may not, and that's what we are. That's what the Planning Commission is charged with when we're looking at the standards. Is the issue of compatibility and transition.
Understood. Thank you. Anything else? So with that, I'd like to invite the applicant to come up to present their project.
Good evening. My name is Greg Bono. I'm a civil engineer on the project. I'm representing my client. I work for PEA. We're based here in Troy. I've been before you on a few previous occasions, so you guys may recognize me. Me and other representatives of my company have worked together quite frequently with Mr. Savidan and Mr. Carlisle through the years. We've completed a number of projects in the city of various uses. We've always appreciated their feedback and advice. I sincerely hope that you guys understand that. We do our best to incorporate any suggestions that arise in our pre-application meetings that enhance the overall quality of our projects for both sides, from the city's perspective and also our clients. It's a delicate balance. You know, and as always, there's limitations to what we can and cannot do. So we've had multiple pre-application meetings with the city staff regarding our project. We started out with a different site layout with a proposed detention pond on the north side and another parcel to the north, which my client is proposing to purchase along with this development. So our meetings and correspondence has spanned the course of several months, and it was ultimately determined that there were some issues with that layout and the fact that the parcel to the north was zoned R1B that limited our ability to move forward with that layout. So we went back to the drawing board, and we generated at least 10 other concepts of varying configurations, unit sizes, etc. My client, just for let the record reflect, my clients invested a significant amount of time and money and effort to arrive at the point we're at today. That being said, so the preliminary site plan review letters stated a number of opportunities were discussed to enhance the site design, and many were not addressed. We kind of feel like that's maybe a slight mischaracterization of our meeting and our discussions, and I wanted to just highlight a few things that we discussed at our meeting that we did actually incorporate into our plan that was ultimately submitted for approval.
Speak up louder.
Sorry, I'm in the microphone.
It doesn't amplify, it just records.
Oh, okay.
The microphones turn up as loud as I can.
Yeah, it's basically for recording purposes, so people at home can hear. But.
Okay. Forgive me, I'm a little nervous with the number of people here.
So again, I just asked the audience to let the applicant speak. Everyone in the audience will get their opportunity to speak at the appropriate time. But that'll allow us to conduct the meeting in the most efficient way. Thank you.
We could go higher.
Higher?
Yeah.
Okay. I have brought with me a copy of our original concept that we met with, and they're always basic on some levels because there's always an understanding of things that are going to change. I don't know if any of you would be interested in seeing that, but with regards to the building separation on the main drive, we initially were proposing a distance of 30 feet, and we increased that to 40 feet. So the face of the building to face of building on the main drive is 40 feet, which includes a 28-foot standard residential road and paved, 2 6-foot paved areas in front of each garage, which our conversation is kind of circled around traffic and safety concerns with people backing out of the garage to have that extra room to be able to see any oncoming traffic before they just backed out into the street. So we definitely were receptive to that suggestion. Our original concept had more intense units on the north side of the street with a 10 and an 11 unit building, which Mr. Carlisle and Mr. Savin suggested we break those building footprints up, which was a great suggestion, and we did. So we reduced our total unit count to provide additional space between buildings and reduce them to the 5, 8, and 6 unit footprints that are currently shown. We did add visitor parking spaces to our site based on our conversations. We eliminated a unit on building 3 in order to provide those additional parking spaces for visitors. We relocated the location of our pedestrian connection to Crooks Road. We had initially showed a pedestrian connection along the north side of our property line connecting to Crooks Road north of Building 1, and we reconfigured our main entrance and shifted the entrance drive kind of corresponding with the main vehicle entrance based on their suggestion, which we appreciated. And in doing so, we did reduce the number of units we were originally proposing in order to accommodate those suggestions. Unfortunately, there's always suggestions that come about that ultimately either don't work from an engineering standpoint or whatever the case may be, can't be incorporated. So shifting the buildings to the south, we're proposing our underground detention system, and then shifting the buildings to the south would require the detention system to be relocated to the north. And there's some significant engineering challenges with trying to excavate and install these kinds of, large diameter pipes in a close proximity to the property line like it is on the north side. The existing ground elevation is roughly 4 feet higher on the north than the south, so we'd be having to excavate an additional 4 feet in depth, which reflects itself into a much larger trench to be able to install the detention system. So, from an engineering standpoint, it's extremely sensitive to design it in that location there. And then in addition, shifting the buildings to the south, so with the 4-foot difference in elevation from north to south, if we pushed all the buildings south, it kind of slides that whole grading surface south along with it and creates a significant additional amount of earthwork and fill and a retaining wall increase in height along our south line. That becomes challenging from a constructability and an engineering design standpoint. We relocating, so I covered relocating the detention system. We can outlet our pond to an existing drainage dish at the south end. We're proposing a 100-year storage volume, which is beyond the city's requirement for 25 and is released very slowly over a long period of time. So I know in situations like this, residents get concerned about flooding and things like that. The detention system is designed to collect all the stormwater and release it at an agricultural runoff rate very slowly over a period of 24 to 48 hours. It's with the low proximity of the ditch in relation to the elevations on site, it's from an engineering standpoint much more practical to discharge our detention system to the ditch that's right there on our south property boundary. Drainage ditch, and we laid our site out to follow the natural topography of the land, so from high to low. With regards to replacing with the landscaping with the vinyl fence, we had reached out to the immediate residents immediately surrounding the property with a proposition of landscaping versus a fence, and the fence was a preferred option in 2 cases anyways. I don't know if we ever heard back from the third resident with the property to the west, the single family home to the west, but the fence, the vinyl screen fence was a preferred option there. The slight jog in the road, we were initially very receptive to this idea at the meeting. We sketched out between myself and the architect a couple of different ideas on how to break the buildings up and create the curve, because we're receptive to this canyon effect and the city's concern. But unfortunately, that it did not allow for adequate space of the underground detention system on either side of the development, north or south, because it kind of just cuts the amount of space in half that you have on either side. The configuration of both the sanitary sewer and water main systems that would have to be installed in the roadway would become extremely more challenging from a design standpoint, with additional manhole structures and water main bends and et cetera to negotiate a curve like that. And it also increased the intensity and height of the retaining wall that would have been required along the south property line. So With respect to the tandem garages, there was a concern mentioned about parking and that residents will end up using guest parking spaces. All I can say is that from my experience with friends who live in multifamily developments that only have one garage space as an example, they do have a space in front of their unit to park outside. And you just have to make accommodations based on who needs to leave first in the morning or whatever your day's schedule might be, who parks first and last. It's, from our standpoint, I guess not terribly uncommon.
I think people are going to have trouble hearing you. You're speaking lower and lower.
Just with regard to the tandem garage, it's just not our understanding that it's uncommon to park two vehicles, one in front of the other, whether it's in a garage or one in a single family or a single car garage, and then one vehicle outside would still be the same scenario. I appreciate a lot of your questions with regards to the neighborhood node and what's permissible by right. We were in a quest to determine that ourselves as we brought this project forward. We felt like what we're proposing to do is significantly less intense than what the ordinance allows with regards to height, density, et cetera. So for what it's worth, we with the townhome development that we're proposing, we feel there's other uses that could come in that would be much more impactful, our opinion, than this. So, yeah, the property is currently zoned neighborhood node. There's no rezoning proposed. We're not requesting any ordinance variances, and we've complied with the setback requirements. So, thank you.
Thank you. Comment?
Yeah.
Thanks. I think we're going to have a few questions for you.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with just a couple. And the public will get a chance to ask their questions after the Planning Commission does. I'm going to start with just a couple. You had mentioned feedback from the residents related to the vinyl fence, I think, on the northern property line. Did you get feedback from the residents on the project as a whole? We'll let the applicant answer, please.
We met with the resident that lives in the right adjacent to our site.
So I've said it several times, and I would just ask that everyone will get their turn to speak. So, sir, you can sign in and you can speak and you can make your point. But we just want to conduct the meeting in an appropriate order. So we want to ask our questions to the applicant, and after the applicant is done, then the public will have their chance to speak.
So we met with a couple of the residents, and it was based on our previous layout that we were originally pursuing that unfortunately didn't move forward with. We did not have a chance to meet with them regarding this configuration now.
Thanks. I'm going to move on to my next question so others could ask their questions. There was, I think, a suggestion to look at the elevations along the northern property line to reduce the impact on the neighbors to the north. So what did you evaluate that suggestion, and what was your determination?
So just to be fair, that suggestion came in the letter that we received yesterday. So in all fairness to us, we haven't not really had a chance to evaluate these suggestions. We evaluate a lot of things that we discussed.
So that wasn't made at the August 13th meeting?
No. But we're open to a lot of what's been suggested in the review letter, and we're going to make revisions accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the Planning Commission for the applicant? I assume Mr. Krent.
You mentioned earlier that you added visitor parking. How many spaces have you added?
We added the section in front of Building 3, as you see it there. So
And how many
there were
spaces is that?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And how many were prior to those 6?
There were maybe 5 in the back, which ended up being reduced to 3 because of the turnaround accommodations we made in the rear.
Okay, so the total visitor parking is 3 plus 6?
Yes.
9 spots for visitors, and how many units are there?
60.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Abhidian, did you have a question?
I'm done.
Did you at all consider any traffic calming devices to mitigate the fact that you're not putting that bend in the road and the whole issue with speeding down that main?
Yes, we're very open to speed humps. Unfortunately, I did not show those specifically in the site plan, but we're definitely open to we don't want anybody speeding through there in our own development. So, but there's a couple of locations that correspond to high points in the grading of the road that would be perfect for something like that. We're definitely open to that.
Mr. Tagle.
You had noted that you've complied with all of the zoning ordinance requirements as far as setbacks and such, and density. I'm concerned with the compatibility of this development with the surrounding neighborhood. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel this development is compatible with the single-family residences that it abuts, number one? And number two, I was noticing on your elevations, and I don't know if you are the author of those elevations or not, but you're somewhere between 60 and 70% vinyl siding on these buildings. Now, if this is a quality development, I would hope that you would consider using a quality material for these buildings. But please talk about the compatibility.
Multifamily residential is a permitted use in the neighborhood node district. There are transitional zonings between single family and other more intense uses everywhere. So from a compatibility standpoint, if it's in a permitted use in a zoning district, it's an opportunity to develop.
But don't you feel that the design of the development has to answer the question of compatibility? Just because you can build it doesn't necessarily mean it's compatible. Because down the road at another site that something might be a use by right, they could build something that would be compatible that might not look like this development. So I guess I'm not sure that you answered the question.
So in fairness, again, we received the city's review comments on this particular configuration yesterday as part of the agenda packet. So we haven't had a chance to
So you're willing to look at that and
yeah, and
compatibility.
in a normal course of action, we received those comments previously and get the opportunity to address them before we come before you for a public hearing and such. So
just so as I understand, you had a meeting with the city representatives, was it in August?
Yeah, I believe they mentioned
Was compatibility at all discussed at that meeting?
I can't recall. I mean, it's a multifamily development, and we were just discussing the zoning criteria. And
thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else for the Mr. Lambert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick questions. I think you may have mentioned that your client is purchasing one of the properties just to the north, or has put in a bid on that. Is that correct?
To my understanding, that yes, the R1B zone parcel to the north is part of the the transaction, the real estate transaction, we're not proposing to do anything on that parcel at this time.
What about to the south, or do you know if your client owns that or not?
No, but that parcel, to my understanding, is for sale. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Tattapelli.
Thank you.
Please, so that, again, we can conduct the meeting in the most efficient manner.
You said you spoke to one resident. Out of curiosity, why don't you speak to the other residents around that area? You said that you spoke to one resident. Why don't you speak to the other residents around that area and the other housing?
That's an excellent question. So our first inclination was to meet with whoever was going to be directly impacted by what we were proposing to do. I know that does happen in other situations. They maybe meet with subdivision associations and stuff, but in this particular case, we reached out to just the immediately adjacent residents.
Just one last question from me, sir. So you mentioned being open to looking at the recommendations from the planning department, because some of them I guess you just received recently. Are you open to looking at that full list of recommendations, or are there some of those recommendations that you have issue with?
We haven't really had a chance to even meet to discuss them internally amongst our team. I mean, we're definitely interested in our project being approved ultimately and constructed in here, so we're definitely open to suggestions, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Krent.
You mentioned earlier, because of I'm referring to the garage orientation, in a row, two vehicles front to back, kind of inline parking. And you said, well, in those situations, people will park on the street to avoid having to juggle their cars. Now, with that said, are you anticipating then parking on both sides of the street?
I would not anticipate anybody parking in the street. There's two garage spaces provided per unit, and these are proposed as 2-bedroom units, and so we can debate the likelihood of every unit having 2 vehicles or not. It's probably highly unlikely. So,
well, you know, in my neighborhood, yeah, we have a slightly narrower street, but that said, when there's a party at someone's house, it virtually blocks the entire street, because if they park on our street, it's illegal to park on one side, but they do anyway. The point is, I can see in the future, because of the narrowness, this is only 28-foot end back curb to back curb. So that means really inside of that's maybe 26 feet, and a car width is, with doors opening, you've got to figure 9-10 feet. So you're looking at 20 feet taken up by the cars. You've got 6 feet to get through. It's a really tight fit. I just don't see it as something, without extra parking on the individual's property, to rely on the street seems a bit of a stretch to me.
I mean, that would be an expectation in a single-family development where you have a multiple available parking and a public right-of-way. If me personally, if I lived in a multifamily development like this, I just wouldn't have a large gathering of people that required vehicles to go somewhere. You can't.
So again, once again, I would just ask that we refrain from commenting until you make your comments. So
if you live there and you want to invite people over,
please don't be afraid to use the gavel and give this audience a warning, because we have to be able to conduct our business. And if we can't conduct our business, then we will clear the room, let the applicant answer the questions of this board, and then you all can file back in. But we need to be able to ask our questions. He needs to be able to answer the questions. We need to give him the respect that he deserves to get up here. You're all going to get your chance to speak. Mr. Faison, please don't be afraid to use that gavel.
I'm not
Give
afraid.
this audience a warning, and if they don't heed the warning, we will clear the room. Thank you. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, if I may. Talking about, again, the street parking, the point is many of those existing homes you're talking about in Troy have a driveway that people park in so that the street parking is not necessarily always used. I'm not excluding parties, but just for everyday visitors coming over to visit, the people in the home, there is usually adequate parking off the street for most homes in Troy. And this just doesn't seem to ring clear with that kind of best practices for the neighborhoods we'd like to see developed in Troy.
Anything else for the applicant? Mr. Tagle.
Could you put up the rendering on the screen? It's on, this is 43 of 78.
What are you putting up, Mr. Tagle?
The rendering?
Okay.
Come on. Not quite sure why that's still up there. I minimize that.
There you go. Just scroll down. Just scroll down a little bit, or minimize that a little bit if you can. Now, I'm looking at this rendering, and I understand it may indicate what the buildings look like, but the setting isn't quite what this project is proposing, is it? I mean, this, am I looking at the sides of the building where you would enter as a pedestrian, like the front door side?
This is a 6 and 4 unit building, so this would be maybe the perspective from Crooks Road.
So there is a road in front of the front door?
There's a public right-of-way for Crooks Road, but then there's a sidewalk, yes.
So you're saying this is, what we're looking at is Crooks Road here? I mean, because, I look beyond this rendering. I mean, and I get it, artists or whoever does rendering sometimes takes liberties. But what we try to do here in the commission is to try to get it as best we can visualize what is this development really going to look like when it's built. And I don't think this is really, as I said, maybe the building elevations are accurately represented, but I don't think the setting is. I mean, beyond this building, I see green and trees. I mean, there's, according to what I've seen on your site plans, are that, we've got road on the backside with a, 6 foot from the curb line to the face of the building. And so that, I guess what I'd like to see when you come back in front of us is a little bit more accurate representation of what does this development look like as you're, moving into the development. I think that would help us visualize that a little bit better.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Just one more question for me.
Oh, yes.
So I know that engineering has concern about the trash collection. So do you have any feedback, like how you're going to manage trash for this?
Each unit will have a trash can, and it'll be curbside pickup, just like traditional.
So the maneuvering was questioned for the truck. So did you get some feedback from anyone, like if it's going to be okay, or?
We will evaluate that, but we initially felt comfortable with the configuration for the ability for the truck to circulate the site.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments from the Planning Commission before I ask the public to speak? Anyone need a break before I ask the public to speak? Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, everyone in the audience who would like to speak will have that opportunity. I'm going to lay out a few ground rules first. It's not a public hearing, but it will need to be conducted as if it is a public hearing. And so please begin your comments by stating your name and address for the public record, signing on the sign-on sheet. Please be respectful of the Planning Commission, the staff, consultant, and the applicants, and those in attendance. And by that, I mean refrain from the comments as we've talked about before. By doing that, you'll let us progress through the meeting more quickly and let everyone have their opportunity to speak. It's an opportunity for you to make comments, but it's not an opportunity for debate between you and the Planning Commission. I'd ask that you refrain from talking, clapping, laughing, or cheering during the meeting. And also, as with the public hearing, I'm going to ask that you all limit your comments to no longer than 3 minutes. The timer here will measure your time. The last point I would make is that we've seen a significant number of emails highlighting issues and concerns that neighbors and residents have with the project. So we are aware of those. We think, or we assume, that many of you will have similar, if not identical, issues. Given that, in the interest of time, if you have an issue, but one of your neighbors articulates that issue before you have the opportunity to speak, I would ask you to think, do you need to reiterate that same issue? Because we will have heard it. Mr. Tagle.
Could you ask each person that comes up to give us an idea of where they live relative to this site? I know they can give an address, but that doesn't necessarily tell me the proximity of their house relative to this property and this development. So I'd like to understand a little bit, are they next door? Are they a block down the street? Are they, so just to try to give us a little bit better understanding of where they are relative to the development.
Okay. I think that's fine, and hopefully everyone heard that, asking that in addition to your address, you just talk about where you live in proximity to the development. So with that, I'll open it up and ask someone who would like to speak to come up and do so. You got the timer, Brent? Excuse me. Go ahead.
Rock and roll. Good evening. My name is Paul Bayless. First of all, I'd like to thank the volunteers on the Planning Committee for doing this important function. I'm a 39-year Troy resident, currently live at the corner of Parkstone and Penrose, which is kitty corner from the development. So out my front window, I would be looking at about 12 units and a retaining wall and maybe a plastic fence in there. I'd like to make 3 comments with respect to the proposed development. Number 1, the development is, in my view, not consistent with the intent or spirit of the neighborhood node concept. Based on the Troy Master Plan, neighborhood nodes are supposed to carry certain attributes. If you look at this development and look at the attributes, it is not a go-to place that takes on a social role. It does not serve as a village center. It is not low impact and does not provide high benefit to the neighborhood. It does not attract and welcome neighborhood residents. Actually, I'm not sure how we would even get to the development from our house. And it does not create a sense of community through shared community space. I'm not sure that there is any shared community space in the development. Secondly, the proposed development would cause additional deterioration in traffic conditions in the Crooks-Waddles Road area. Currently, from approximately 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 3 to 6 p.m., my ability to make a left turn out of our subdivision is entirely dependent on the mercy of people driving west on Crooks Road and on Coolidge. Coming south on Crooks, my 75, turning west on Waddles, at peak times, it sometimes takes 3 or more lights to make a right-hand turn. So I bide my time by looking at the people trying to get out of the 7-Eleven parking lot, which is even more difficult. Troy's city engineer shared a memo outlining the anticipated traffic impacts of the development. This concluded that the development is not expected to, and I quote, significantly worsen traffic conditions on Crooks Road. Not exactly sure what the term significantly worsen means, but if my college-age son said his grades were not expected to significantly worsen next term, I wouldn't be real happy. In addition, this is only the second neighborhood node development for the Crooks Waddles corner, and if we just take a drip approach and say every incremental development will not significantly impact traffic, is anybody taking a step back and saying if we do 10 developments, will those have an overall significant impact on traffic in the area? Third point, proposed development has inadequate parking. I think that's been covered several times. 9 parking spots that are not in the tandem garage units. I just believe this situation will result in guests parking on Carson Drive or trying to find alternative parking somewhere in the area. With respect to the request, we request the Planning Commission utilize its authority under Section 806 to review the style and design. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Would anyone else like to speak?
My name is Igor, and I live on 1192 Provincial Drive. It's south of Wattles, but on the corner of the Crooks and the Wattles. I think the traffic tonight was very bad. And then the other thing is, I think Troy is famous for its environment with its green spaces. And when we first moved here almost 10 years ago, it's very nice. And then last couple of years, we see all kinds of developments, and then the wooded areas, little pockets has been eaten by all those things. And I feel like are we moving into an overdevelopment phase of this? I understand we need tax dollar, we need property tax, and for a lot of things. But then I'm still thinking what's our essence, what's our nature, what's our character as a Troy. And then the last point I want to make is my kids, they go to Bemis, and then they go to Bowling Park Middle School, and then it's very crowded. And I'm thinking this 60 units will have quite few school-age kids. And then Troy School is good, so that's why it's a drive or it's an attraction. However, Mr. Wang, the principal of Bemis, they always struggle. We have kids, 29, 28 kids in one classroom, and then he always say we don't have more classroom. So I don't know where you're gonna put those kids in, and we don't want them suffer either. So that's my point. And thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you. Did you sign in?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Doug Gerard. I live at 4197 Carson Drive. I'm on the west side of the street, 2 houses north of the project. My wife and I have lived in Troy for over 42 years and at our current address since 1992. We are very concerned about the proposed townhouse development adjacent to our neighborhood, and for many reasons. We sent a letter to all of you outlining our numerous concerns, and that was on August 5th. One of these concerns is the negative impact to the storm sewers, the lane drain, and the 100-year floodplain. The storm sewers are already at capacity. My home is located just east of the lane drain, and the City of Troy has jurisdiction over the lane drain in that area. During our 27 years of residing in our current home, we have had 2 major sewage backups in our basement, as well as some of our other neighbors. These raw sewage backups in our basement have resulted in many destroyed items, valuables lost, not to mention the restoration costs, the carpeting, padding, drywall, painting, and all the trim rebuilding that had to be done. These repairs were very expensive. One of the storm sewer manhole covers is located on my next door neighbor's property, which is right next door to the new development. And during heavy rains, this manhole cover is acting like a geyser, with water gushing out of it and flooding the land and the lane drain. The Department of Public Works of the City of Troy came out a few years ago to reconfigure the storm sewer in order to mitigate the geyser-like effect and flooding. However, it wasn't successful. We continue to get the water gushing out of the manhole cover and flooding of the land. If the proposed townhome development is approved, and the land townhomes will need to be elevated, resulting in even more negative flooding to our adjoining properties and downstream areas. With the storm sewers already being at capacity, we will experience even more flooding and sewage backups in our basements. I've had many telephone conversations and emails with Antonio Cicchetti, who is the civil engineer for the Department of Public Works for the City of Troy, and he emailed me the following, and I quote, "If or when a new development is proposed in this area, the developer will be required to accommodate the Lane Creek and all the storm runoff upstream of the Lane Creek and provide a public easement across the creek, so the maintenance and repair will be the responsibility of the City of Troy in future." Density is another one of my concerns. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. I am Laura Lipinski, and I live at 4233 Carson Drive, which is 4 houses to the west on Carson Drive. So this development would significantly impact us. So I've lived in Troy for most of my life since 1975 when I moved here when I was 2 years old. Moved, and then my mother worked for the City of Troy for 19 years, and I worked for the library for 3 years while I was in high school. And me and my husband got married at the Troy Historic Village. I worked at Standard Federal, which is now the Bank of America building. So I have a long history with Troy. So I don't necessarily want to move, but this development is really disturbing to me. So I'm very attached to the City of Troy, our subdivision, and our current home, in which we have enjoyed the quiet and private setting that we live in, yet being close to amenities. Growing up in Troy, where a lot of green spaces, which I see disappearing before my eyes. I believe children and adults flourish best with easy access to green spaces. When looking at the proposed Crooks Road townhome development, I don't see nearly enough green spaces or green spaces taking advantage of the natural features of the lane drain stream that is part of a 100-year flood zone. I believe a development consistent with the master plan for the node would take this natural feature into consideration, creating an environmentally friendly open space and gathering area for the social aspects which are provided for in the master plan specifically. I don't see much green space inside the development that will attract the residents of the development so they can gather, play with their children, and walk their pets, which would create a sense of community in the development. A lot of safety and welfare concerns for the extreme density of the development. I have a lot of safety and welfare concerns for the extreme density of the development and for Carson Drive and the rest of the existing single-family neighborhood. Since there aren't enough green spaces in the proposed development, which may cause children and maybe adults to use our streets to play. The EVA created into Carson Drive will give the development many residents easy access into our once dead-end street. I am also concerned with the loss of quiet enjoyment of our existing single-family homeowners due to the large influx of residents who will live in a densely packed multifamily development. I greatly feel that the style, height, especially density of the proposed development does not conform to the surrounding neighborhoods. So this type of development should not be allowed. I'm speaking for a lot of neighbors. I have other concerns that obviously other neighbors will bring up as well. So, but yeah, that's just one of them.
Thank you.
So, yep, thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak?
Hello. I'm Andrea Noble, and I live at 1330 Bradbury Drive, which is around the curve. But I'm speaking on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Homeowners Association. You've seen a development proposed to be in the Crooks Wattles neighborhood node. Multiple facets of this proposal are inconsistent with the Troy Master Plan. There are 21 unique neighborhood nodes detailed uses in the Troy Master Plan, pages 79 and 80. Each node has a more specific intended use because of how they've evolved over many decades as a city, the inherent geography, existing commercial and residential uses, and many other factors. Broadly, and I quote, "These economic neighborhood nodes are destinations that draw people, visually distinguished from the balance of the corridor strips through greater density and scale. Variation in building height will often be used to separate the node from the surrounding area, but will not be so extreme as to visually overpower abutting neighborhoods." This, end quote, this is an obvious conflict with SP 1922. The size, the 40-foot height, and the number of buildings is quite visually overpowering. The SP 1922 development proposal does not embrace the, quote, "primary intended use and character of the neighborhood node," end quote, for the Crooks Wattles node, page 79 of the master plan. A substantial portion of the node north of Wattles is within the Lane Drain 100-year floodplain, as you've heard, and is adjacent to the Whitechapel Cemetery. So it's rational that this specific node's development be, I quote, "low impact and provide a high benefit to the neighborhood using the least amount of land. Compact, walkable, mixed-use development with a combination of uses serving the immediate surroundings would be an ideal, and integrated development would allow a user to park once and meet several daily needs. The city also recognizes the expansion of Whitechapel to the north of this node would be appropriate. There is nothing low impact in the proposed development. 60 units crammed into a total of 8 40-foot tall buildings 10 feet apart on a parcel barely more than 2 acres is not low impact by anyone's interpretations. Suggested neighborhood node site design attributes are largely unmet. Buildings should be separated from the right-of-way by a landscape green belt, one lane off-street parking or pedestrian walk, or a combination of these. A 5-foot perimeter sidewalk is all that is planned. The site proposal better fits the high-density residential classification typical in Maple Road corridor. This is inconsistent with any neighborhood node. For these reasons, the Board of Directors of the Woodlands of Troy asks you to table this
Your time is up.
with substantial modification.
Good evening, I'm Carol Fichter. I live at 4180 Carson. We live on the south boundary of the projected development. In July, we were notified by Tollbrook Brokerage that a multifamily townhome development was going to be submitted to the City of Troy, bordering our south property. As you can imagine, we were devastated as we had no idea that the property next door to us was zoned neighborhood node. Tollbrook wanted feedback from us on the landscaping transition. They talked about landscaping. They did bring up a fence, which we indicated is not in our homeowners association, and we were told that this property is not part of our homeowners association. They told us in the back of our yard, which is where the water retention was supposed to be, that they would have to put a fence if the neighboring neighbor had children and wanted a fence because of the water retention. They never once talked about the property on the south side having a fence. The new plan is inconsistent with the Troy Master Plan zoning ordinance, section 1320B2, which states a landscape buffer should be constructed to create a visual screen at least 6 feet in height along the adjoining boundaries. The changes to the placement of the 60 units now facing our south property and the inadequate landscaping with no green barrier landscaping buffer is unacceptable. It would be unreasonable for us to have 3-story buildings next door that are able to look right into our living room and our bedroom through their second floor balconies. It also, due to the density of the project, at the dead end, which we live right at the dead end, which is now going to become an EVA. Again, EVA, Emergency Vehicle Access. In case of an emergency, people would need to go through there. With the alley of the complex, not a cul-de-sac, which people would be allowed to circle around and exit the complex, the alley now ends at the EVA and has a T turnaround. So visitors, such as FedEx, UPS drivers, garbage trucks, food deliveries, school buses, mail carriers, they'd all have to turn around at that EVA. Lack of parking spaces in the complex would lead to possibility of people parking on Carson, which would and could compromise the emergency of this vehicle, the vehicles on the EVA. In the winter, our street is plowed by the city of Detroit. The majority of the...
Please complete your comments. Your time is up. With 3 minutes.
Okay. The project is highly in density, and it's just not anything that should be compatible to our street. Thank you.
For your comments.
Hi, my name is Susan Turpin. I live at 4216 Carson, 3 doors down from the proposed development. I bought the house 14 years ago. I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. My main objective as a parent, any parent would agree, that was to make sure that my children were safe when playing outside. The luxury of buying a house on a dead end has its advantages. There's no pass-through of any kind at the end of the street. You know your neighbors. The traffic won't be heavy since no one has a reason to go down our street unless they live on it, and very rarely does anyone else park in the street. My children are older now, but we still have many young children on Carson Drive. We're very worried since these children are accustomed to the quiet dead-end street. If 60 units are built, there will be additional traffic and parking on Carson of vehicles owned by all the new residents. Allowing these residents to park on Carson Drive along with a lot of their visitors is a major concern to all of us. The revised plan does not provide a circle for large delivery, which was mentioned, garbage or other vehicles to turn around at the end of the street. With additional 12 or more children, there's likely a need for the Troy School District to have to pick up these children, which will require a circle turnaround. And with all due respect to the engineer, the revised plan doesn't have enough guest parking, only 9 guest parking spots. I beg to differ on what he says. The development's tandem garage parking is most likely too tight for 2 cars, along with all the things that most people need to store in their garage, since there is no basement. If there are 2 cars in a unit, human nature will probably be to park one of these cars outside. Most people don't want to park behind the front car and then have to move it out of the garage when the front car needs to move. So what will happen? They will park outside of the garage. The townhome development residents' desire to park outside of their garage will cause hardship to our Carson Drive and will cause Carson Drive to be less safe. There is a concern that the development's private street will be turning into a through street into Carson Drive. This is a huge safety issue for our children as much as adults. The style, the height, the density of the proposed development does not conform to the surrounding neighborhood, so this type of development should not be allowed. Carson Drive has been a quiet dead-end street for over 27 years. Let's keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Hi, I'm John Bridge. I live at 4089 Penrose Court in this area. We're just, I would say, a little west of the development. And First of all, I wanted to thank all of you for the volunteer work that you do and the great work that you do. And particularly I want to thank Mr. Tagle and Mr. Krent for your insightful questions that you ask. I can't add anything to what these folks have said. I've been a part of this community for my entire life, 71 years. I can remember when Troy was simply a gas station and a police station, and that was it, many, many years ago. We're blessed in this community, the way that the community has grown, the tax base that we have, the businesses that we have, the green space that we have. I mean, we've got a lot going for us, and I just really would hate, as I think all my friends and neighbors have indicated, I would just hate to see the wrong decisions made with regard to the further development of our community. In addition to being a resident for 71 years, I'm also a veteran of many corporate meetings. And I know that many of them end up in deferral of decisions, and I know that the consequences of those are often very problematic. I'm concerned, and I think I speak for the others here, that if you take the recommendations of the planning director and the planning consultant and defer a decision on only items 5 and 8, that you're impliedly approving all the rest of this plan, and that the next meeting will only be addressing those. So I'm asking you, I am pleading with you on behalf of me, and I think most of my neighbors, that you defer any decision, any approval of any part of this plan with a request for a complete rework, subject to all of the concerns expressed by my friends and neighbors and the concerns expressed by Mr. Tagle, Mr. Krent, and many others here. Thank you. Thank you.
And if people want to speak, you can line up in the aisle behind the speakers, just to make it more efficient than to come up, and so you can come up sequentially.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Laudicina. I live on Fountain Drive, which is one street north of this complex. I won't repeat all the other things that everybody else has said about the height, the size, and the density of this proposed development. We all know it doesn't fit. And pulling out onto Crooks from Fountain Drive is extremely difficult, regardless of what the traffic analysis shows. And this complex is even closer to the intersection of Waddles and Crooks. These people won't be able to get out of this subdivision, out of this townhome area. But my question is really to the Planning Commission. When you changed the zoning back in 2011, is this what you envisioned? 60 dwellings, 40 feet high, and 2.5 acres? Come on, that just doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you for your... I'd ask again that we refrain from clapping, and so we can progress through the meeting most efficiently. Sir?
Hi, Joe. My name is Brian Connolly. I live at 4234 Carson Drive, which is the fourth house up from the proposed development. I live there with my wife and 3 children, and one of my main concerns that's been talked about is the emergency vehicle access. That would be convert Carson Drive from a dead end into an open street. As background, I've lived on Carson Drive for 4 years. My wife and I lived in New York City with a young son when we found out we were going to have twins. She's from this area, so we moved back here based on the reputation that it has. She has a sister who lives in Troy with her husband and 3 children. We looked at numerous locations in the area and decided without reservation that our home on Carson Drive was the best fit for our family. We invested a great deal of our savings to purchase the home and set up our lives here, intending for our children to grow up on Carson Drive and my wife and I to retire there. I can assure you we would not have done so if we knew this monstrosity was a possibility. My wife works in Troy full-time now. Our son attends Bemis Elementary, and our twins will attend there next year. We love our home and are proud to live in the city of Troy. But most of all, we love living on Carson Drive because of the safe and family-friendly environment that it provides. Carson Drive is home to numerous families with young children, including our 3, who are enjoying activities like learning to ride their bikes, playing sports, and walking to nearby school bus stop on Fountain Drive. If the EVA is allowed to be installed at the end of Carson Drive, the activities that I just mentioned would no longer be a safe option for my children. I simply will not feel safe if this development and the EVA are allowed to open Carson Drive to an unacceptable increase in volume of vehicles and pedestrian traffic. Based on my concerns of this EVA, I went and looked at a similar EVA located at the Rochester Commons condominium project near the fire station on Rochester and Big Beaver, which attaches a formerly residential street to a new development of townhomes. This EVA is an eyesore with large "Do Not Enter," EVA, and no parking signs. It affords no privacy to the adjacent street and homes, as all trees and brush were removed and is now a wide open access point for pedestrians, bicycles, and any small motor vehicles. To place an eyesore like that at the end of Carson Drive would change how I feel about the safety of our children. It makes me sad, and to be honest, angry, to think that the city of Troy is more focused on the interests of high profit margin developers and would hide behind a, quote, master plan that doesn't support its citizens, rather than maintain the integrity and safety of the neighborhoods that have made Troy such a beloved home to so many families. If these types of densely populated projects and EVAs continue to infect our quiet neighborhoods, many families, including mine, will be forced to move to another city, one that respects the rights and wishes of its existing citizens and the safety of their families. I respectfully request, along with everyone here today and many others who feel the same but aren't here today, that you deny this project and do not allow an EVA of any kind to destroy Carson Drive's existing landscape. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Dave Bertelson. I live on 4356 Cahill, which is 1 block west of Carson. And I wanted to bring up to the planning consultant, I noticed on the site plan thing that talked about 3 stories tall plus a tandem garage. Is that 3 stories or 4 stories? I want to make sure the record's... 3. Okay, please, could you please correct the site plan description, a total of 3 stories? So what there. And the other thing I'd like to bring up was you talked about vinyl siding, and I'm not for this proposal at all, but the planning commission did a very nice job when they put the 7-Eleven there at Waddles and Crooks, and it was brick and everything else. So when the guy PEA talked about homes, vinyl siding, and then keep on going down, the city has already addressed those issues when they did do the 7-Eleven. So I think we need to address the whole thing that direction. So other than that...
Thank you for your comments. Did you sign in?
I will right now.
Sir, you can step up.
While you're doing that, my name's Mike Lipinski. I live at 4233 Carson Drive, so the street just north of the development. You met the prettier version of the other household earlier. I want to talk about a couple things. One, I want to reiterate that I don't agree, as well as the rest of the folks in this room, that this project meets the definition of a neighborhood node. As a matter of fact, it violates several of the provisions that are in there. So I would, ask this commission to not approve any of this plan tonight. We already talked about EVA, so I don't want to beat it to death, but I want to use it as an example because I think it's a problem of what we're dealing with a lot of these big box developments. The EVA is there not because of code or zoning. It's there because our emergency responders look at these plans and say, I can't get heavy equipment or emergency equipment down here if there's an issue. So we take that and allow the developer to drop as much product into their footprint as possible and move the issues out to the surrounding subdivisions. I just feel that this commission has the ability and should look at forcing these things to be self-sustaining. That infrastructure should support the development. There should be adequate streets. There should be turnarounds. If school buses, if garbage trucks, if emergency vehicles, if delivery vehicles can't get down this street, then that's an issue. So, I feel if we put the profit of the developer over the, safety and the rights of the citizens and the surrounding communities, we're representing the wrong groups. I also wanted to talk a little bit about, the development itself. I know there's a lot of pressure when, the developers, if this developer, as an example, has sued the city before, I'm sure that has to be on the front of your mind. Maybe it impacts your decision, maybe it doesn't. But I know that that's out there. We're a pretty established community. We have the means and we have the funding available to us to undertake any initiative that we see fit to protect our rights. And so when you're considering this, I would just like you guys to consider that as well, because that's something that's already been discussed and something that we already have in process. Finally, look at the room. Obviously, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of resolve with these folks tonight. People came out because they have an issue, and we won't tolerate a development that doesn't respect the adjacent neighborhood or overpowers the surrounding areas. And those aren't my words; those are your words out of the master plan. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments.
Hello, my name's Ken Shack, and I live at 4459 Lehigh. And Lehigh is a little northwest, maybe about a quarter mile, Mary Hill Acres, of which Carson Drive is part of Mary Hill Acres. I want to speak from a different perspective on this. First of all my good neighbors, they're saying all the things I put in a letter or an email, but the perspective I have, and it's been touched on, the traffic on Crooks. And when I look at this, and I think there was the one elevation, and they mentioned 6 feet or even 10 feet from the building to Crooks, the elevation looked great. It looked like little trees and maybe emptying into a little subdivision 2-laner. Looked beautiful. Well, it's 5 lanes. It reminds me, trying to get out into Crooks, and it's been touched, of a game my kids played called Frogger in the morning. And it's just a matter of time that someone's going to be in here and saying, hey, this EVA, we can't get out, we've got to come in. My perspective on 4459 Lehigh is already at those critical hours. Neighbors are not going out on Crooks. They're coming up Lehigh, and they're exiting onto Northfield Parkway into a blind intersection close to Troy High School where there's already been accidents, students hit during rush hours, and it's just going to be a matter of time that someone's knocking down that EVA. So these people, because it's too dangerous, last winter trying to get out on Byron or Fountain with the snow piled up, you couldn't see around the corner. They're going to have this 365 days a year coming up on this intersection with 6 or 7 feet, and all they have is buildings. It's not going to work. And I just hope that the commission takes a good hard look and has the engineers take a good hard look on that, and hopefully there's a different traffic plan other than what I think is inevitably going to happen. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Daryl DeCute. I live at 4143 Glencastle Drive, which is part of the subdivision, the Woodland subdivision, just to the west of the proposed development. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for your service to our community. I would like the Planning Commission to consider limiting the number of units for future neighborhood node developments. I do believe that the 60 units that are proposed here are significant, and I would believe that similar developments in the future, the residents would prefer to have some kind of limitation on the number of units. I would also like to suggest that for the safety of the individuals living in the 60 units, that you consider about fire truck, fire hydrant guidelines and access requirements for 60 units. And I'm also concerned about potential future development of the parcel at the corner of Waddles and Crooks, which is currently Woodlands, which is currently a very, very beautiful segment of the community, and I'd like to maintain that if at all possible. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Shan Jiang. I live in 3936 Boulder Drive, so approximately like 1 mile to this location. So my major concern about this plan is it doesn't seem to me that it's well planned in terms of considering in a big picture, right? So let me make one example. In terms of electricity, I think we had one power outage this year and probably one previous year as well. And DTE Energy constantly sending me emails during winter and summer in peak time in terms of trying to persuade people to save energy, right? So this area looks like 10 single-family house area, but with 60 units, which means approximately 6 times population than what the rest of the area will be, right? So 6 times population means 6 times of stoves, 6 times of ovens, 6 times of water heaters, 6 times of furnaces, 6 times of refrigerators, all these big applicants. And no matter what is designed within this area, the electricity has to be connected to the outside from the power company to get into, right? This outlet and inlet could really be a bottleneck. And I fear this overpopulation can cause the rest of the area be powerless when time comes to like peak time in winter and summer. And this electricity is just one example. And also the previous gentleman mentioned about the gas, about the water, about the fuel, all the other consideration. I don't think the plan they are considered, and I don't think they are considered in a way considering the rest of the neighborhood, but only this particular area. So that's my major concern.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Angela He. I live in 1347 Fountain Drive, Lehigh and Fountain. I have an 8-year-old attending BMS and 17-year-old senior year on Troy High School. I'm here not talking about specific those code, building code and the zoning regulation. I'm here talking about the feeling of the residents. And one of my point is, I'm surprised no one has brought up the value of the single-family house currently in this neighborhood. I don't know if it's part of the planning committee consideration. This proposal, is it going to change, meaning increase or decrease our home value? This community was built in 1980s. So a lot of residents here, I think they are either, if they are in the 50s, they are ready to downsizing. Or if they are in their 70s, they probably were thinking about the plan to move to the south. In the couple next years, we just had, the house value moving up. And I personally, I'm not ready, but I'm like my next door neighbor, both of them. I think they want to save the money for their retirement. They want to save money for their health care in the future. This plan, I just want to know if you guys, when you put on your the vote, is this part of your consideration? If not, try to put in back of your mind, think about the residents, the aging residents over here. And then I totally agree, everybody else speaking earlier of me, I want to suggest one practice, if it's not already in the place. The one, when you have some plan like this put in place for everybody to vote, should it be an independent traffic study in the corner of the Cruz and Vatos, meaning traffic count between 7 to 9 and the traffic count between 4 to 6. How difficult the people will turn in right now, independent traffic study. And my second proposal is, should you guys or the planning committee or consultant already consult the school district, get their opinions and input? If we vote yes on this proposal, what about the future? I imagine there's going to be floodgate being opened. And if we don't have such common practice, I think it's waste money, even on the standpoint of the developer. They are paying the service.
Please wrap up your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
All right, my name is Wei Long Hao. I live at 4589 Tipton, close to high school, which is a little bit far from this development. I'm here, I just want to make 3 points. Just to, some of the points probably have been made, but I think it's important to remind everybody that, we need one thing to consider for the children. I brought my son here. One of the reasons we moved to Troy is because the school district, when we moved, he was about to start first grade. Because the BIM was so crowded, he was put in Schroeder. By the way, it's a really great school, but we have to move him back, to BIMS just because he has the little sister. So the teacher told us that this actually put the children, if you move them, frequently, unnecessary burden, for their, development. Sometimes even actually traumatizing their development. I want to actually, keep in mind that. I'm here not to talk about them because we are here already. We are talking about on behalf of the future residents moving here. So the second point I want to make is the safety, because I share with one of the gentlemen mentioned that live on Lehigh, is that recently even we live on Tipton, there are lots of traffic, so increasingly the more. So because the kids actually play on the street sometimes, it's like it's getting more and more scary. So the third point I want to make is the environment. Is that again. So think about it. We actually cut down those trees. That we all learned some. Health issues, how important those trees are. I was told by a colleague who actually is a plant ecologist said the reason actually in the hospitals that there are a lot of trees because those trees help people feel better. If you think that, we as residents, we live there, we cut those trees, we are basically destroying, our health, the health future or the children's future. Those are the points I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Simon? Yeah. You can come up and speak.
My name is Joyce Fasanga. I've lived in Troy for 42 years. My address is 3709 Old Creek Road. I just want to clarify, are these rentals, condos? What are these? I'm asking a question.
So this is not a forum for that. This is just a forum for you to make your comments. We may address some of the concerns when we speak after the public speaks, but it's not a Q&A.
Okay, because let me just say, with these 2 bedrooms, I know what's happening where I live. And we have basements. And when these children move in a 2-bedroom, you'll see there's going to be 5, 6 children in the premises because everything has changed. And I want to address this in the future because people are living in the basements. They're bringing in, I see nothing but a nightmare. And if this passes, someone's going to get sued.
Have you signed in? And thank you for your comments. Yes, miss, you can speak.
My name is Angelina Lin. Before I say something, I want to ask, handsome man, where do you live? And where does the boss live? I live in Troy for 15 years. My husband is more than 20 years. My daughter, she was born in Troy. Today I asked my daughter, do you want to build more house in Troy? She said, absolutely no. Where's the little animal's house? She's in 6th grade in Ballin Middle School. So this is, let me remember, a couple years ago, I'm a private art teacher, I'm an artist. A couple years ago, there's an international pollution contest. One student, she drew a little baby deer crying on the subway and looking for her mom, her dad, her family, and then she will be killed in 1 minute by the traffic. So I think Troy is a small town, and small road, traffic jam, accident, and then the school also small. Because sometimes the family, like parents meeting, we need to park the car anywhere. So I think maybe if you spend money for developed school or something plant the tree for the animal's house, maybe it's, oh, appreciate, okay? I don't want my kids in the future, in her childhood, the memory just big house, beautiful car, Wi-Fi, beautiful iPhone, iPad. Maybe still have something beautiful with her little friends, little animal friends. I think for me, okay? And I think everyone will suffer for the temporary enrichment of one developer. The priceless open space will be gone forever. It is one-way door. Preserving the small vanishing amount of green space or maybe natural place should be our first priority. That's my answer. Oh, I got the news this afternoon. I think if give me more time, more students' family will be here. And I will prepare more reason to say no. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Sir?
Hi there, Scott Lehman, 1075 Fountain Drive. So I'm at basically the top of that square, and I'd be looking directly at this complex. So concerns, obviously many, one of which right out my backyard now, I'll be looking right at this monster. So, but I wanted to bring up a specific point in regards to traffic as far as just specifics. So when I'm coming northbound on Crooks Road after work at 5 p.m., I can barely get in the left turn lane to make my turn into Fountain Drive. So my question is, if I can barely make my turn into Fountain Drive and I'm up there at the top of the square and we're going down another, 300, 400 yards, at that time of the day, how is anyone in that complex going to be able to make a left turn if I can barely get in the left turn there at Fountain? Because the traffic's coming down. So if I can barely do that, how are they going to do that? And if they can't make a left turn, how are they going to get into their complex? Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Is there anyone else? Yes.
All right, good evening. My name is Lee Yongzhen. I'm living in 1126 Reading Drive, which is a little bit north to this block. I'm here just to, honestly, and I just saw this thing, received this today. I kind of feel shocked to see this development. I just feel this one, my biggest and very simple concern is the compatibility issue, which is Mr. Tagle just mentioned. In my view, it is totally incompatible with the neighborhood. And if this development happens, it will totally mess up the beautiful and peaceful neighborhoods, the surrounding neighborhood. Think about, keep in mind, it's the 3-story and 60 unit. And I just noticed there is another lot for sale, which is kind of the same size as this one. So thinking about what happened next. If we build another 60 unit, 3-story, and thinking about what happened in that neighborhood, it's just very tiny area. Again, I want you guys, I hope the city will make the right decision. And in my view, this will mess up everything in this beautiful city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Thomas Mikulski. I live on 4408 Cahill Drive, which is a few streets northwest of this development. I'm a lifelong resident of Troy, Michigan. I grew up on the east side of Troy, on Long Lake and John R., and moved over to this area about 10 years ago. I really love the city, and one of the things that I love about the city is its diversity. And I think the diversity of the city is partly reflected in the diversity of the development that's happened in the city, especially over the past several years. I like the fact that when I go down certain streets, every street that you go down has a little bit of a different character. Big Beaver is certainly a major commercial boulevard. Rochester Road is a dense market type of area, I would say. And Wattles, in my mind, is sort of a nice, sort of sleepy road. Much of it is two-lane, and the sort of development, I think, clashes very much with the character of that road. There are other places, I feel, in the city that that are more amenable to introducing complexes like this, and so I think the Planning Commission should take into account, what should the character of different neighborhoods and different roads be. I understand as an engineer that might be difficult to quantify. How do you quantify beauty? How do you quantify sort of character? But I think some consideration should be made so that, there's room for people in the city who like, high-density commercial developments to enjoy those. But there's also room for residents in the city to enjoy more suburbanized or more sleepier type of areas. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Zach Reed. I live at 1395 Fountain Drive, so it's the street right above. I do want to reiterate the fact about coming home and trying to make that left turn. It is insane. So I want to give somebody, another opinion that is true. It's hard to turn in there. So I don't know how they'll be able to turn in, back up traffic, and so on. A lot of these residents, they've been here forever. My wife and I are new residents. We just bought a house there a couple years ago, our forever home, and we're starting our family. And my kids, I like all the green space, and I like for them to be able to run and do kids things and things like that. But Fountain Drive, people just haul. They cut through Fountain Drive to get to the high school or what have you. My concern is that people are going to go through Fountain Drive even more because they're trying to avoid this intersection. So I wanted to say that too. I also wanted to say thank you for disclosing any potential conflicts of interest. I wanted to say that. Also, thank you for this development, because I always wanted to get involved in my local government, and this is the chance that I'm able to voice my opposition. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Did you sign in, sir?
I did. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Om Shah. I'm a junior at Troy High School, and I live at 3874 Gatwick Drive, so it's a couple miles away. I want to offer a unique perspective of a student at Troy High, and I've been experiencing the growing population there for a few years now. The freshman class this year is one of the largest, and most classrooms are almost at capacity now. So I think this development, while it may not affect us greatly and will only bring a few kids, it sets a dangerous precedent in the fact that these developments, if continued, will bring more and more students into Troy High, where there's simply not room to take many more students. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Hello everyone. First, my name is Jing Shu Chen. I'm currently residing in the 1386 Bradbury Drive, which is the west side of the proposed development site. So, as I'm from the perspective of my family and my neighbors, so we can obviously see that there is no point for develop such construction, and so we can see that obviously it will hurt our value for the current residents or any future potential residents, including natural environment, traffic conditions, safety issues, and public school resources, and even reduce the value of existing houses in the community. So I do have a request or suggestion for people who will make the final decision. Could you think about any points, any value, or any benefits to the existing community, except bringing money to the developer for such construction? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm a City of Troy resident. I've been living in Troy since 1983 when my house was built in Mary Hills Acre subdivision. I live on the south side of Fountain Drive. And From my backyard, I could see that retention basin that I believe most, commission members know about. It's just west of Crooks Road. And beyond that is another subdivision too that's adjacent to the proposed development plan. I'm not going to reiterate what has already been expressed because many of the things I wanted to say has already been said by the other people. But I am concerned, for example, why in 2011 the city rezoned the corners of Crooks and Waddles to neighborhood and nobody, or at least 95% of the people, were never notified, or sent anything or consulted that this, rezoning is taking place. Why were we kept in the dark? I don't mean to be cynical, but it seems that the greed is prevailing over common sense over here. And I'm just wondering whose deep pockets are being filled. That's all I have to say.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? His name and address, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Did you sign in? Okay, thank you.
He still didn't state his name. I don't know what his name is.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Did you state your name when you came up?
No. Sorry if I didn't, but I put down my name earlier. My name is Linus Stonies.
Thank you.
And I live on 1251 Fountain Drive, just quarter of a mile from Crooks Road and about, less than a quarter of a mile from this project development.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jerry Reck. I live at 4187 Penrose Drive. It's the house immediately west of the development. I want to talk about a couple of things, one of which is the Troy Master Plan has a good description of the intent of neighborhood nodes. It mentions the missing middle. And in that missing middle, it gives a really good illustration of the change in uses from single family all the way up to urban residential. And I think that what was kind of missing here when we talk about permitted use or what's allowed, we need to take into consideration the intent of the zoning ordinance and the master plan, where it shows us that going from single family residential to townhouses is like skipping a layer or two. If you kind of you want a comparison of that, you can look at what happens in the multifamily residential category, its zoning. The units per acre that can be developed in multifamily residential when it's not abutting a single family residential is 24 units per acre. If you look at it when it's abutting single family residential, it's 10 units per acre. There's a significant difference. And that's not being taken into consideration here, in our opinion. The other thing I wanted to talk about was Building Form C, which is this form that this plan is based upon, provides for lot access and circulation. States driveways must be integrated into buildings from the rear in an alley configuration. If you look up alley in the definitions of your zoning ordinance, it says it's a secondary vehicle access not intended for general traffic. If you keep that in mind and then look at the primary entrance, which is provided for in section 5.06E, one of the areas that you were talked about earlier of addressing, the primary building entrance shall be clearly identifiable and usable and located in front facade parallel to the street. There's no primary entrance here. They've left out a street. They've put in an alley and no street that addresses the front of these units. There's no way for somebody to get from a delivery vehicle to the front of these units without walking all the way around the west end or the east end of this development. And then lastly, one of the things I wanted to point out is, to a certain degree, this proposal is really an insult. I mean, there's even no provision in here for snow removal. There's no place to put the snow in this. It's continuous driveways. They can't plow it to the side of the road, and they can't put it at the end of the road because that's the emergency vehicle access.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else? Signed in, thank you. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I didn't sign in before. I'll do that when I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Artist Fletcher. I live at 1120 Jefferson, and I'm on the south side of Crooks, or south side of Waddles, sorry, just on the west side. And my view is a little bit different than the residents here because I have the backing right up to Waddles, and I see the nice woodlands that's on the other side of the street, and I can pick out where the houses are. And I'm afraid with the nice 3 stories that I will be able to see not only that development, but the future developments that you're going to put in front of that. Because the node development is not something that my family participated in and agreed with at the time, having moved in before it, not knowing that this node development was going to happen, and not enjoying the commercialization which will come from being on the west side here of Troy, having been on the east side where there was such commercial development and backing up and hearing trash trucks at 5 in the morning. So it's not a great thing, and I'm not looking forward to future development of the node at the southwest corner, right at the corner for the Tim Hortons and the strip mall that's going to be coming there as soon as those plans are finalized. So I'm really looking forward to getting more involved with the community government, as another gentleman said, not only for this proposal, but for other ones as well. I just want to address also the more traffic concern, but not necessarily from the perspective of the residents who already spoke, where they're concerned about the turning, but looking on the south side of Crooks, anytime there's been a problem before, you just put in another traffic light, and I don't necessarily want more traffic lights on the Crooks Road because it is finally an area where you can free flow with the traffic, even though if it backs up during the peak hours. So please consider that in the design, not only of this development, but the other ones between this and the actual intersection at Crooks and Waddles. I just want to address also the overcrowding of the schools. No matter what Dr. Macheski says about being able to accommodate future families and redistricting to be able to balance the population of Troy across all the schools, there is still closure on the schools for Troy High, for Boland Middle School, and it doesn't matter how much you redistrict. Those still are closed to school of choice and are already overcrowded. So please consider that not only in this development, but also in future developments. And it's very important because according to the neighborhood communities, this is a very popular zone, the BBT zone with the Bemis, Boland, and Troy High. And we don't have money for sidewalks. So unfortunately, my kids don't have a bus, and the preferred method of transportation to the middle school is to walk through the park at night with snow and other considerations. So please build properly for the school busing. And lastly, this development is rather dense and compact, and I understand it's multifamily, but it seems like you're trying to cram it all into one parcel. Maybe if it's expanded against 2 parcels, it will fit more in the greenbelt and the original intention of the node development. So I appreciate your time and consideration.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we've had a number of comments, so I think we've covered most, if not all, of the issues, but please.
Sam Chen, reside in the 4382 Devonshire. I'm a dumb guy, by the way. But the early time I did some practice for urban planning. So I'm just concerning on this. All these people, everybody here, just concerned for today, right? Its impact on traffic, utility capability, and the safety, and the school. Okay, anybody just concerned for today. But I have a concern for the future, for the next generation. 20 years from now, what is happening if we have this property in the size? Troy now as a top 10 cities crossing the nationwide. If we agree on building on this, 20 years later, Troy would be in what position? Reality, all the utility, traffic, schooling we're not capable to handle the project. And plus, a city, a street needs characters, needs their styling. We do have some condominiums on the same street, which on the Waddle and Coolidge Corner. So why we rush into that project is for today, not concern for the future. So we have next generations. What do we give to them? First question. Second question, back to the common sense, why we need to put this project in the corner? Because based on the planning, you still have two larger parcels next to the down south. So eventually, because of the corner, we change the master plan for the Troy City. It's worse because we are Troy City financially, we have trouble. We need a more property taxpayer. I'm just dumb guy. I'm asking questions. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. I don't see anyone else who wants to comment, so I'll return. Yes, on this item, right? Okay, please.
I live in Ottawa and had no intention of speaking tonight. But as you know, I've been attending Planning Commission meetings now for a couple of years because I was in the dark about what was happening in my neighborhood. And I am amazed that this group of people came out tonight to defend their rights as citizens. I own property that's a little like 2.05 or 6 acres. I can't imagine putting 50 units, living spaces in that small, dense property. And I think Ms. Cruz, who is one of your members, is not here tonight, but she mentioned one time that she perceived that there was a beginning battle coming to the forefront about residents and developers because there's so little green space left in Troy. But we don't want to see that happen. I guess you all know what happens to rats when they're piled on top of each other. They begin to eat each other. And the result is not a pretty picture. I really think there has to be some, and I'm not smart enough to figure it out, but you people are. There has to be some new evaluation of what we're going to allow and what's left in Troy. What is it going to look like after they've devoured what is left? And I'll be interested tomorrow or the coming week to see what the Troy Times and the Gazette says, because I was ignorant, and I'm ashamed of it. But I ask you all to keep up your vigilance. Don't let it go away. Determine what you want to do with this city, whether you want it to turn into a laboratory or you want it to continue to be a beautiful community. Thank you.
So with that, I think we'll bring it back to the table for any planning commissioner comments. I would, if you don't mind, I'd first like to say, as we went through the discussion at the outset and we spoke to the applicant, I think that the things I highlighted were transition, compatibility, and also the design. I think we've heard from the residents concerns about those and additional items. So, Mr. Hudson.
Mr. Chairman, audience, I've listened to your concerns. I've read, it looks like about almost a half-inch of emails from you. I've read and listened to the planning consultant's comments. In particular, I read an 11-page document from the Woodlands of Troy Homeowners Association, written by your president, Ben, I'm probably going to murder his name, Robinger. This document, I've been in the Planning Commission for 12 years. I've never seen such a document like this in my life. It is a magnificent presentation of facts intermixed with our ordinances and the zoning code. and I'm almost convinced that this document alone says this project will not survive being placed in this node. The project, the buildings are too tall. 4 stories is ridiculous. 2 maybe. The density is too much. Why not get rid of a couple buildings? Why not make it a pleasant place to live instead of a rabbit warren? And I'm going to be surprised if we adjourn it tonight to come back that it's going to be much improved.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Anyone else? Please. Mr. Pettipill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we take a vote on this, I just want to put out my opinion on this project. I would like to thank the development for coming out here and presenting this, but I just believe that this is not a fit for our city. This development should not be developed, and we have done a housing study a few weeks ago, and I think from that meeting, it's just not right. It's too congested and does not fit with the environment of the housing around it. And for this matter, it's time to listen to our residents, and I know they don't want this, and I stand with them. Thank you.
Any other comments? I guess I would also say, I heard the applicant say that he was going to take the comments of the planning department under advisement, which I thought were fairly comprehensive. But I did have one question for the planning department. You know, there was a comment about if we postpone, are we then limiting our flexibility to only those items, numbers 5 and 8? Or is it, again, a more broad issue and we would see and assess the entire project if and when it were to come back, if we were to postpone?
Well, depends on what the resolution says.
We're going to include in the resolution things about this planning commission in the audience. So.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Carlisle.
5 and 8 were referenced, and those are specific standard sections in the zoning ordinance. So if it's postponed based on those 2 factors, in addition to what the planning commission adds, it's the totality of the development under review. It's not, but by postponing it, we do take into all factors in consideration, not just specific ones. And so that 5 and 8 covers a gamut of issues under the standards of the zoning ordinance.
Thanks for clarifying that. That's what I thought was the case. Okay. Any more comment from any of the planning commission members? Are we ready for a resolution? Mr. Kreitzer,
Resolved.
you are?
That preliminary site plan approval pursuant to Article 8 of the zoning ordinance as requested for the proposed Crooks Road townhouses located on the west side of Crooks, north of Waddles, parcel 88-20-17-476-013, Section 17, zoned NN, Neighborhood Node I, District, be postponed to provide the applicant with the opportunity to address site plan items noted in the report, brought up by this commission and the people in the audience, and on these written submissions to the Planning Commission. And specifically, the items noted in the report should be addressed to meet the site plan review standards and neighborhood node design standards related to compatibility, transitions, and many other items.
Support.
Support. Mr. Hudson, thank you. Ms. Zarnicki, when you're ready.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
So motion carries and the item is postponed. Thank you. Do we need a break? Yeah, okay. Take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
Sit down and look like a commission again.
So, okay. I think we covered item number 6, public comment on items on the current agenda. So I think we'll just go to item number 7, Planning Commission comment. So, Mr. Tagle, I'll start with you.
Want to hit that gavel again?
Yeah.
Thank you. We just need to finish our work.
Yeah, I have no more comments tonight, thank you.
Are you kidding? Heck no, I'm done. None for me.
I'd like to thank our student representative. I understand it's his last day on the Planning Commission. We've been lucky. We've had another very active student rep, so I appreciate the time and effort and your contributions here. So thank you. Mr. Hudson.
Excuse me.
Yep, sorry. Mr. Rapidian?
Likewise, I just want to echo that. I want to wish you good luck in your future endeavors and your college career as you head out the door and move out, not too far north. So thank you for being part of our body here.
Ms. Ballard?
Nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Rock.
Nothing. I'd like to thank you also for your service to the community.
Mr. Lambert?
Yeah, just thank Mr. Caterpillar, and you never know, he may be back.
I'm thinking he might be.
I hope so.
Ms. Arnike, anything? Ms. Carlisle? Savadon?
No, thank you and good luck at Kettering.
And Mr. Frank?
Nothing, thank you.
All right.
Said my piece.
We are, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't let you speak. Yeah, apologies.
So I did write a little speech for everyone here. So dear fellow planning commissioners and residents of Troy, it has been my honor serving as a representative on the planning commission for the city. We as a planning commission went through many developments in the city, approving and disapproving, but at the end of the day, we all sit up here to serve the people of our city. I'd like to thank Mayor Slater and Mayor Pro Tem Baker for nominating me and appointing me for this position. I would also like to thank Mr. Savadant and Jackie Ferentz for doing a wonderful job as staff members for this committee. And while I am in college, I know that all of you will make right decisions being on the planning commission and building our city in the right positive way, so the people of this city can call their home. Thank you.
Nicely done.
And we will adjourn on that note.